German Chancellor Angela Merkel has defended her promotion of disgraced payments company Wirecard during a trip to China almost 2 years ago. Merkel told a closed-door parliamentary committee that the September 2019 trip came before there was reason to assume problems with the company other than speculation, and that Berlin often touts its businesses overseas. Wirecard, a one-time investor darling, collapsed in 2020 after conceding it couldn't account for 1.9 billion euros of listed assets. Its accounting irregularities had been widely reported by the Financial Times for years, heating up in spring 2019. All right, for more on this, let's go to DW business reporter Chelsea Delaney in Berlin. Chelsea, this was the big day. This was the climax of this investigatory panel. Were there any bombshells? Have there been any bombshells so far from Merkel's testimony?
I think there wasn't much in the way of bombshells from Merkel's testimony today. She pretty much expected what everyone thought she pretty much said what everyone expected her to say, which is that there was really nothing wrong with what she did when she went to China in 2019 and lobbied for Wirecard. At that point, Wirecard was trying to buy a company in China. There was a lot of questions going into this today because before that meeting, she had met with a lobbyist for Wirecard. This was a former economy minister in Germany, a former defense minister as well. And there was a lot of questions about what they talked about in that meeting, whether he was pressing for her to go to China and do this trip for Wirecard. She says that's not what happened, that the trip itself was not about Wirecard. So she's really played down these questions about the influence that Wirecard has had on her. But she did acknowledge that at the end of the day, she's the chancellor and she bears responsibility.
This investigatory panel has been going on for months now. What questions seem to remain unanswered?
Well, I think the biggest question, and one that hasn't been really answered in a satisfying way, is how so many people who had responsibility, who had regulatory oversight over Wirecard, just didn't take these reports that had been around since 2015 seriously. So we've seen a lot of people saying that it wasn't their job to raise these concerns about Wirecard. The BaFin, the financial regulator, accounting regulators, everyone's saying, sort of pointing fingers, but I think it's a little bit hard for a lot of these parliamentary inquiry members to believe that nobody in this years of periods where there were many reports about these inconsistencies were able to raise the flag on these concerns.
Chelsea, the government has introduced reform since Wirecard really collapsed. Would that prevent another Wirecard from happening?
Well, they definitely want to make it easier to stop something like this in the future. They have said they're going to beef up BaFin, the financial regulator. They're going to give it more power. They're going to make it easier for them to launch investigations. But what this also showed was that Germany's having a difficult time regulating tech companies. So one of the problems was that they couldn't really figure out who was responsible for regulating Wirecard because it was in part a banking system company, it was in part a technology company. So everyone was sort of saying maybe this isn't our job. So they also now need to think about how, as we move forward in digitalization plans, they're going to sort of reshape their regulatory system for that purpose.
All right, Chelsea Delaney in Berlin, thank you. Wirecard is just the latest in a series of large-scale corporate frauds in Germany, including, of course, Volkswagen's diesel emission scandal. In the newest issue of Foreign Affairs, Constanze Stelzenmüller with Washington-based think tank Brookings Institute writes that the scandals have, quote, have revealed a deeply flawed corporate culture and a resistance to accountability and oversight. Now, earlier today, I asked German lawmaker Florian Tonkar if he agreed with that assessment. He's a member of the Wirecard investigatory panel. Here's what he had to say.
I couldn't agree more. This is absolutely correct. I think shareholders' position in German corporate law is too weak. The supervisory boards are not working professionally enough, at least not all of them. They meet from time to time, but the management has much more freedom, much less control than in other jurisdictions. This is a corporate governance issue. And when it comes to the authorities like BaFin, I think BaFin is a very, very active authority in daily business, is regulating deeply the daily entrepreneurial business on the financial markets. But when it comes to crisis, when it comes to special situations where decisive action must be taken, It is acting slowly and bureaucratically. So I think more of American supervisory culture with more entrepreneurial freedom on the one side, but on the other side, decisive action against those who violate rules. That would be something we should learn of and should implement in Germany as well.
Briefly, if you can, do you think Wirecard could happen again today?
Anything which could have happened in the past can happen today, not only in Germany. Of course, the awareness of all control instances, control levels from the supervisory board through the auditors to the authorities has risen due to the Wirecard case. But we cannot be sure, and there will be other attempts to implement fraud, manipulation, and other crimes. Right. So we must be aware, we must be active.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Florian Tonkar, member of the German Bundestag for the FDP and a member of that Wirecard investigation committee. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
For more on this, we're now joined by Michaela Küfner, our chief political editor. Michaela, tell us what Merkel told the investigative committee this morning.
Yes, she was very much on the defensive, and the big question, of course, was why did she raise Wirecard when she was in China in September 2019, months after the Financial Times had reported on Wirecard not being sound, a lot of money potentially missing there. And she explained this simply by saying that this fitted into an overarching policy that Germany had and has, which is opening up the Chinese market, allowing for access, particularly on the financial sector. And Wirecard was seen as a potential candidate to deliver exactly that and to allow for cross-border payments directly into China. So she said that she was following the advice of her own advisors, who also were criticized here. Angela Merkel quite clearly also defending one of her key advisors, Mr. Röller, whose wife allegedly also had some business dealings in China, so compliance issues were raised as well. It was quite a historic moment, really, because Angela Merkel was very much on the defensive here.
So what could this mean for Angela Merkel and her, and especially for her legacy, since she's not going to be chancellor for much longer?
Well, it could leave a huge question mark hanging over what it meant to have access to her, because one of her former ministers, Theodor zu Guttenberg, the former defense minister, spoke with her personally just before she traveled to China in 2019, and that issue was raised. She denies that this immediately led to her taking on the whole Wirecard issue, that this was something that came from the advisors who really were much more knowledgeable on the substance matter. But it could, at the very least, leave a question mark hanging over her legacy and the question of access and compliance. What it has already sparked is an overhaul of Germany's financial watchdog, the BaFin, and there are also questions about how independently it acted and whether it was really fit to do what it's supposed to do, which is preventing these kind of incidents like the Wirecard failure.
Michaela Küfner, DW's chief political editor. Thank you so much.